Hello everyone and welcome back to All About Steph 1 with me, Steph, and today is the final round in the tier list series for the end of the 2021 season, and today we're going to be ranking the races that occurred. So if you haven't checked out the other ones, make sure you go and check them out. I ranked the drivers' performances and the trophies and explain the tier list names in my previous videos. So let's get straight into it, and we're going to start off with Bahrain. We're going to go in race order, shall we say. Bahrain, to begin with, I'm going to put it in You're Doing Amazing, Sweetie, because it was a great race. I think it definitely set a precedent for what we would be getting for the rest of the season, because wow, watching Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen battle it out until the very last few laps. There was the problems with track limits as well, and the stewards not being able to decide or define what track limits was, which I think also sets a precedent for the kind of stewarding that we were going to get for the rest of the season. So in general, Bahrain was just a great race. It was so exciting to see cars on track after so long, which, you know, we have the break every single year, but still winter feels like ages because we don't get any racing. So it was really great for us to come back to Bahrain. I think it was a great season opener. I like it at the start of the season. Yeah, thumbs up to Bahrain. Next up we have Imola, which I'm going to put actually in Happy Clappy because I think it was a good race. Fundamentally not one of the strongest ones we've had in 2021, but I do think it was really exciting. Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton obviously battling. There was that big crash between George and Valtteri, which completely shook up the entire race. Imola, I haven't seen the best things from it yet, and I don't think the racing there has necessarily been as good as we might have wanted it to be. It's a circuit that was very much designed for much smaller Formula 1 cars, and even though the racing was much better than anticipated, it wasn't my favourite, so I'm going to put it in just good. Next up we have Portugal, and I do remember that this wasn't one of my favourite races at the time. Portimao in 2020 was a fantastic race, and I think a lot of us had really high expectations. I do still love it as a circuit, but I don't necessarily think it provided the best racing this year, so it was kind of just an average race. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst at all, by any means. We're just hopping over the border of the Iberian Peninsula now, and we're going to Spain, and I think this was definitely a much better race than Portugal, which was confusing to me at the time because I really thought that Portugal would trump Spain in terms of which one would have better racing. But Spain was actually a good race, and I think the strategic element, which I love in Formula 1, I love talking strategy and I love seeing how different strategies affect different drivers. So this was a really interesting race for me with the different strategies between Lewis and Max. Moving on to the Monaco Grand Prix, I think this one has to go in yeet. I think qualifying was very exciting. There were so many drivers who had the potential to get on pole. It ended up being Charles Leclerc before he crashed at the end of Q3. But once we got to race day, Charles Leclerc wasn't able to start. There weren't many overtakes happening. I think Monaco will be better once we have these smaller cars. I don't know how much better, but it can't get any worse. Next up, we've got Baku, and I'm putting this in I'm a massive fan of this. This is going right at the top to begin with. It was so tense, so exciting. Sebastian Vettel, Pierre Gasly were both having really great races, and then the final 2-3 laps after that red flag, incredible. The performances from Pierre Gasly, Charles Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, they are the standout three for me that were just doing absolute bits in those last laps. It was like a sprint race, and that's how I wanted the sprint races to be, with everyone attacking each other and, you know, just completely going for it. So I really enjoyed that one. Next up we have the French Grand Prix, and this is another one where we have kind of low expectations as Formula 1 fans because it hasn't always provided the most exciting races in the past, but we were very pleasantly surprised by the French Grand Prix, and I am going to put it alongside Spain in Happy Clappy. I genuinely thought Mercedes would have the edge, but this was kind of where we realised that Red Bull really had a lot of pace this year because both Verstappen and Perez were doing very well and able to kind of capitalise on the lesser pace of the Mercedes. Next up we have the Styrian Grand Prix, which is going in doubt. Yeah, average. It was a very dominant race by Max Verstappen. I'm actually going to talk about it with the other Austrian race as well, so the one that happened the following week. I love Austria. I think it provides really, really great racing. I really didn't like these though, because I feel like a dangerous precedent was set by the stewards regarding wheel-to-wheel racing. Lando Norris was penalised, Sergio Perez was penalised, all for kind of going wheel-to-wheel with people. I don't think those should have been penalised. I feel like they were racing incidents and it almost took away from the racing that they were penalised. I didn't love that part. Next up, we have the British Grand Prix, which is the first race I ever attended in person. It's going in You're Doing Amazing, Sweetie. I personally thought that this was a fantastic race. The sprint race as well, I really, really enjoyed. I know that it was perceived a little bit differently from those at home rather than those at the track, but the atmosphere, the vibes were absolutely immaculate. Obviously, that first lap crash between Lewis and Max was completely defining in the season. But to watch Lewis Hamilton, a British driver, win his home Grand Prix in front of a home crowd and do it kind of overcoming that 10-second penalty, catching up to Charles Leclerc, who actually had driven such a great race as well. He was doing a good job. Both McLarens were doing a good job. It was an overall good race from a lot of drivers, and I really, really enjoyed it. Next up is the Hungarian GP, which is probably one of the most chaotic races of the season. We got the iconic image of Lewis starting a race alone. I'm going to put it in You're Doing Amazing, Sweetie, because I would have liked to see a little bit more overtaking. Me personally, my favourite tracks are the ones with a lot of, high speed, harsh braking zones, like Canada, like Monza, like Silverstone. Those are kind of the tracks that are my favourite and that I really enjoy watching the racing there. So Hungary doesn't really fit into that category, and it's one of my least favourite tracks. But the race was fantastic. There was some impeccable displays of driving. Mick Schumacher defending from Max Verstappen. Max Verstappen moving mad in a damaged car. And Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso. Oh, it was just immaculate. There was so... do you know what? I've actually talked myself into putting it in. I'm a massive fan of this. The drive-in that we saw was absolutely impeccable. I think there were so many class performances up and down the grid that race. Woo! Do you know... oh, I'm going to have to rewatch this one now. Spa, and this is one that I will not be watching again, and it's going in Yeet because it wasn't even a race. And I can't believe we as Formula One fans spent hours waiting for a race to start that basically never did. Moving on. We've got the Netherlands, and this is the first time that we had actually been to the Dutch Grand Prix because it was cancelled in 2020. Really great atmosphere, and I was not even there. You could just feel the good vibes that were coming. It felt so good for Max Verstappen to race in front of a home crowd, especially with this season that he was having, so I was really, really happy for him. And I'm going to put this in Happy Clappy because it wasn't one of the best races of the season, but it was definitely really good, definitely solid. The drivers were finding their feet in terms of where they wanted to take the racing line, especially on the banked corners. I think turn 3 was a really interesting one because drivers were taking completely different lines. So overall, I really enjoyed this one. I'm very much looking forward to kind of how the racing is going to improve in the next few years at this circuit. And up next is the Italian Grand Prix. It is going... in You're Doing Amazing, Sweetie, right next to Silverstone. I would have loved to see kind of how the race played out if Lewis and Max had both stayed in the race. Unfortunately, that was not the case and they both crashed out. It was a McLaren 1-2, the only 1-2 that any team has had this season, with Daniel Ricciardo taking the win and Lando Norris coming home in second. Very exciting race, definitely had us all on the edge of our seats. Can't say the same for the sprint race though. I don't think Italy was necessarily the best place to do it. I do maintain that drivers tiptoe a little bit too much around the sprint race and they don't take risks, and it's because the reward isn't big enough. So I think that's one of the things that needs to be focused on when we're looking to change and adapt sprint races in the next year. Okay, now we're moving on to Russia. Straight up into I'm a massive fan of this. This race had me on tenterhooks the entire time. Lando Norris getting his first pole position and doing really, really well. And the rain coming. Oh, I love races with changeable conditions, but the heartbreak that I think everybody felt for Lando Norris was absolutely insane. And it was a great win by Lewis Hamilton. You know, he'd had a very quiet race. Max Verstappen, fantastic race as well. P20 to P2. Amazing drive. I think this was a race that George Russell also picked up points in. I can't fault this race at all. I thought it was absolutely spectacular. Turkey's next, and I'm going to put it in I pretend I do not see it because I feel like this whole Grand Prix we were building up to something. and it didn't happen. We didn't really get the changeable conditions we were expecting. Last year's Turkish Grand Prix was absolutely crazy as well, and this wasn't the same. Shout out to Esteban Ocon though for not making a tyre change the entire race and getting the tyres to the end, because that was I have no idea how he did that. The USA, this was an interesting race because I really thought it was going to be a Mercedes-dominated track and Max Verstappen wasn't going to have a chance in hell, and lo and behold, he did. I thought it was a good race, so we're going to leave it in happy clappy. Fernando Alonso was getting a little bit squirrely left, right and centre. At this moment, I began to think that the championship was 100% out of Lewis's reach and it was just going to be Max all the way from here, but lo and behold, that wasn't the case. And so, yeah, it was a really dominant display of driving from Max Verstappen then. Top job. Next, we're going to talk about the Mexican Grand Prix, which I believe Valtteri Bottas was on pole for. He got the Fangio Award. Max Verstappen, I think, won the race. This was an incredible time for Sergio Perez because he became the first Mexican driver to stand on the podium of his home race, which I'm sure was an absolutely incredible experience for him, and I'm really happy that he got to have that. This wasn't one of the most unpredictable races of the season. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It's definitely not going to go down as a classic, but I will say the atmosphere in Mexico is always on point. The vibes are always immaculate in Mexico. 10 out of 10 on my bucket list of Grand Prix to go to because it looks insane. Now we move on to Brazil, and I was there, which I'm never going to stop talking about. This was a fantastic race. I'm going to put it right up there, and I'm a massive fan of this. In general, the whole weekend was absolutely great as well because the sprint race was fantastic. Definitely the best sprint race we had. Lewis Hamilton's charge from the back of the grid to, I believe it was P5, immaculate. Coming on to the actual race as well, proper wheel-to-wheel battle between Lewis and Max. There was just so much excitement in the air as well. The vibes from the Brazilian people were so good. So many good drives. And yeah, it was a fantastic race. I don't know if I'm maybe inflating it because I was there and it felt amazing, but I thought it was spectacular. Next up is Qatar, which is another race that I was at. And this is going in happy clappy because it was a really good race. Max Verstappen completely minimised his damages within the race, and he and Christian Horner both thought that a podium was kind of off the cards because it's going to be difficult to overtake around this circuit, but it actually turned out to be a very interesting circuit for Formula One. It's very similar to Bahrain in kind of it's quite flat, and I mean, they look quite similar as well. But yeah, I really enjoyed this race and it's going to go in good. Next up, we have the penultimate race, which was Saudi Arabia, which was going in You're Doing Amazing, Sweetie, because I really enjoyed this race. And I think that's very contrary to people who weren't there as well. The tension is also what made it better than maybe it potentially was, because the tension between the title protagonists was so high. There were incidents up and down the field. Sebastian Vettel, Kimi Raikkonen, Yuki Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher crashing. Oh, there was just so much going on and it was so chaotic, but I thought it was a beautiful location. It looked absolutely gorgeous under the lights. The whole show was a spectacle and I really enjoyed it. And last but not least, we have Abu Dhabi, which I am unfortunately going to put in... I pretend I do not see it. And it's not because it was a bad race, because I was really enjoying this race. But the actions of the stewards on this final race of the season have really tainted what the race could have been for me. There was lack of communication and the FIA just completely rewrote the rules. But yeah, we're going to leave it in I pretend I do not see it because I hope I do not see it again. And I hope that that never happens and that for the 2022 season, the whole thing with the regulations, with reading the rules, with the FIA and the inconsistency within the stewards, I hope that all of it is going to be fixed, is going to be resolved, because we cannot have another season that is completely overwritten by problems that the stewards or the FIA have created within races. That was a rather somber note to end this video on, but I have done all of the races. Thank you so much for sticking through me for all of these videos. I hope you did enjoy it, and if you did, leave it a like down below and comment if you agree, comment if you disagree. Subscribe if you have not already. This is the last video from me before the holiday season, so Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. I will see you in 2022. Bye!